In the small, sun-drenched village of Elle, life thrived in cycles of planting, harvesting, and celebration. Children darted through the fields, their laughter echoing against the horizon. Among them was Tinuola, a spirited young girl with a curious mind and a heart full of dreams. Tinuola's world was simple but vibrant. Her parents, though not wealthy, provided a home filled with love and discipline. Her mother, Aduni, was a skilled weaver whose hands seemed to create beauty from thread, while her father, Alanrawaju, was a farmer who worked tirelessly in the fields. They raised Tinuola to be hardworking and respectful, often reminding her a woman's honor is her strength. Yet, even in her idyllic childhood, shadows loomed. In Elle, girls were groomed from a young age to become wives and mothers, their worth often tied to their ability to bear children. Tinuola, though still a child, overheard whispered conversations among the women. The pressure was implicit, a weight she barely understood but would one day carry. At 16, Tinuola's world shifted. Her parents announced that she was to marry Ajoni, the son of a neighboring farmer. Ajoni was just a few years older, a young man with a boyish grin and a determined spirit. Tinuola had only met him once, during a village festival, but she remembered his laugh, hearty and contagious. Though nervous, she trusted her parents' judgment and entered the union, with a mix of apprehension and hope. Their early days were filled with laughter and shared dreams. They spoke of building a home where children's laughter would echo, of planting a garden that would bloom as beautifully as their love. Ajoni worked hard in the fields, while Tinuola managed their modest home. They were young, full of life, and believed in the promise of a bright future. Yet, from the very start, things did not go as they'd imagined. Tinuola's first pregnancy ended as abruptly as it began, with her giving birth in the dead of night to a silent, still child. Ajoni was devastated, but he comforted her, saying, "We are young, there will be more children." But each time she became pregnant, it ended in the same way. Her babies would leave her in silence, their fragile lives snuffed out just as they began. As the years passed and she lost more children, Ajoni changed. The love in his eyes became something darker, edged with anger and disgust. He started to say things in his frustration, whispered accusations that she was cursed or bewitched. He grew cold, eventually withdrawing from her completely. One night, after she'd just buried her fourth child, Ajoni left. She woke to find him gone, his things packed up, and only a message with her family. He could no longer bear to live with a woman who only brought death. Tinuola returned to her parents' home, carrying the weight of her losses like stones in her heart. Her family was sympathetic at first, but sympathy faded quickly into unease. In the village, people began to whisper. Mothers pulled their children closer when she passed. Husbands muttered as she walked by. And in the market, vendors refused to touch her hands when she bought food. They said she must be cursed or worse, that she was taking the lives of her children for something dark, something unholy. Yet even with all this, her family insisted she try again, that another marriage might bring different fortune. So, she married Adikanol, a quiet, hard-working man from a neighboring village, who was perhaps more hopeful than Ajoni had been. He didn't speak much, but he was kind to her at first. She prayed that with Adikanol, she might finally have a chance to raise a child, to build a family. But it wasn't long before she faced the same bitter fate. Two more children came into the world and left in mere breaths, both wrapped in her arms as she prayed and cried, desperate for even one of them to live. Adikanol, like Ajoni, lost patience, but instead of leaving, he turned to violence. The blows would come in flashes, sparked by a single word or sometimes by nothing at all. The villagers only shook their heads, muttering that she was indeed cursed and deserved such treatment. Some people even began to accuse her outright of witchcraft. After her seventh child died, Adikanol cast her out of his home. By then, she felt hollowed, her soul carved out by years of suffering and rejection. Her family took her back reluctantly, but there was no solace there either. She became little more than a shadow in her own village, pitied by some, feared by most, and left to wander without purpose. Then, one day, an elder approached her father, a sly grin on his face. He brought news that the old village chief, Chief Oilake, wanted her as his wife. Oilake was over 70, with a reputation for ruthlessness and power. He already had 8 wives, women who tended to him and bore his children, and yet he wanted Tinuola. Rumor spread quickly. The cursed woman would be marrying the chief. Some villagers sneered, saying that Elle would use her for her dark magic, that her curse could not harm him. When Tinuola heard the news, a chill ran through her. Her father saw the horror in her eyes, but he was resolute, dismissing her pleas with a simple, "You've brought nothing but shame to this family. At least this marriage will give us some pride." The preparations began at once, and she felt trapped, suffocated by the future that awaited her. She would become the ninth wife, a forgotten woman among many, condemned to a life of servitude and silent obedience. On the eve of her wedding, desperation overtook her. She knew she could not survive this fate. As night fell, she slipped away from her family's home and made her way through the village in the dark, avoiding every familiar face. Her feet carried her to the edge of the village, where a single vehicle was parked. She climbed into the back, her heart pounding, praying the owner wouldn't discover her until it was too late to turn back. Few hours into the journey, Dr. Ola, a visiting doctor from the city, who was the owner of the car, stopped to buy some snacks at a roadside restaurant. When he was done, he opens the car booth in order to drop some stuffs inside, and he found her there, curled up in his truck. He was taken aback. He wanted to scream, but she quickly fell to her knees and pleaded for him not to, crying as she pleaded. Ola, moved with pity, assist her to the car and then calm her down. When she was calm, he asked her what happened, and she poured out her story, her grief spilling like a river that had been dammed for years. She told him of the lost children, the abuse, the accusations. She had never told her story to anyone like this, and when she finished, she expected him to be repelled, disgusted like the rest, but he wasn't. He looked at her with genuine compassion, offering her a place to stay and the promise of help. In the city, Dr. Ola's words made her begin to hope again. After running medical tests, he explained that she had a rare blood disorder that made her pregnancies difficult. Her children hadn't been lost to any curse or dark magic. It was simply a medical condition, one that he assured her could be managed with the right treatment. Abina wept at the news, feeling the years of pain and rejection lifting, if only a little. As time passed, Tinuola and Dr. Ola grew close. He was unlike anyone she had ever known, patient, kind, and filled with a gentle strength that helped her rebuild her life. He saw the spirit within her, the light she thought had been extinguished long ago. In time, they fell in love, and with his support, she became pregnant again. Under his care, she gave birth to twins, to beautiful, healthy babies who filled the room with cries that echoed with hope and new beginnings. Years later, when she and Dr. Ola returned to her village with their children, the villagers were stunned. They watched in silence as she walked through the familiar paths, her head held high, her twins laughing and toddling beside her. She embraced her parents, who wept with relief and shame, finally understanding that the suffering she had endured had been cruelly and unfairly thrust upon her. In the village square, she gathered the courage to speak to everyone who had once cast her aside. She told them of her journey, of the truth she had learned. Her voice was steady and clear, filled with the strength she had never lost, only hidden. The villagers listened in silence, moved not only by her story but by the woman who had returned not cursed, but triumphant, with the life they once tried to steal from her now restored. From that day on, Tinuola was no longer whispered about in fear. Instead, her story was told as one of resilience, of how a woman who had faced the darkest sorrows found her light again, and whenever she returned to the village, she was greeted with respect, for they saw her not as the cursed woman but as a mother, a wife, and a symbol of hope.
Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and also to subscribe to this channel, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.